I've learned a lot of surprising things about recycling here. Some things are good, some not so much. And a lot of the information I got was from this excellent website, rts.com. They covered a lot of the details that I'm getting ready to go over. So they have 74 facts about recycling that you might want to look into. But this is what I've learned, and it's made me wonder about recycling and just how lucrative it can be and where a lot of the shortcomings are. So I learned that about 35% of what we throw away gets recycled. It's a pretty dismal number, but it's not as bad as I thought it was, to be honest with you. We don't have a lot of the proper facilities in place, and a lot of recyclable items actually still end up in a landfill. So it's an infrastructural problem that I think could be fixed. I was surprised to learn the amount of paper that gets recycled. It's around 70%, but a lot of products, paper products, like with glossy covers and things like that, cannot be recycled. So those usually end up in the landfill. I have another blog post about what to do with non-recyclable paper products. Aluminum can be recycled infinitely. Only about 65% gets recycled, which really surprised me because you can actually make money bringing aluminum to the recycling center. So, why wouldn't you? I learned that glass is also infinitely recycled, but only about 30% gets recycled due to various complications. So that website I visited covers a lot of things: paper, aluminum, glass, e-waste, which are electronics, plastic, textiles, food, C&D, and steel. So I've blogged about some of these topics, and this website gives a really good overview of some of the shortcomings and some of the other problems along with it. So I'd love to have my own glass recycling business, but it's only going to be lucrative if you have people buying the cullet, or the glass that's been broken down into its sand-like form. Electronics are difficult to recycle because they have to be broken down. It could be potentially hazardous. Only about 17% is collected and properly recycled. However, it can also be very lucrative due to a lot of the materials, the raw materials found in these electronics. When properly processed, you can make money doing this. So I know that there's an electronic recycling center in my hometown. I'd love to see what all they do and potentially tour it someday. Plastic is the biggest culprit. It's by far the worst. I think less than 10% actually gets recycled. They have the little recycling symbol on all the bottles, but it's pretty much just a scam. I need to do more research about plastic. That's probably the next topic that I'm going to cover. China used to buy a lot of our recycled plastic products, and then they stopped in 2018, and for good reason. It wasn't being processed and it was just piling up. So it's kind of a scam, the whole you can recycle your plastic bottles. It's not getting recycled. It's usually just getting baled up and then either stored somewhere or buried or dumped in a landfill. Textile waste is a huge problem, and I already blogged and made a video about this, about the amount of clothing that gets wasted. I'm a huge advocate for shopping resale and buying products that actually break down and aren't polyester based. Shopping resale is one of the best things that you can do. So about 95% of textiles have the potential to be recycled, but I believe it's only around 15% actually is. So if you can go without buying that new shirt, avoid it if you can. Food is a pretty big topic. I know that roughly 50% of the food we produce ends up wasted, which is tragic, and a lot of it is just thrown in the landfill despite it being compostable. So it can break down and it can make for great compost, which is soil. So that's something I think would be a really easy place to start. That's somewhere where I would like to start, is to have a composting business. Construction waste, I know, makes up for a lot of the waste in the landfill. Turns out concrete is often recycled. People reuse it a lot for various construction projects. Metal is another one. Metal, I think, has one of the highest recycling rates. And what I've learned all in all is that we just don't have the facilities and the infrastructure in place to process all these raw materials. And it seems totally doable, and it's something that I really want to do someday. But again, it's going to take a lot of research and a lot of preparing, because I'm just not sure that I have the facilities available that I'll be able to do it, but maybe someday. So this is what I've learned about recycling in the United States. The numbers are a little disappointing and discouraging, but I'm going to make it a mission of mine to see what I can do in my hometown. So wish me luck.
So I've been doing a little bit of research about glass and why more glass isn't being recycled in the United States. And one thing that I learned that really surprised me was that glass is 100% recyclable, that it doesn't lose the quality or the purity, and it can be used for a variety of projects. So I visited the Glass Recycling Coalition website to kind of get some details. Most Americans are in favor of recycling glass, yet we're only recycling about 30% or so. And I thought, well, if it's 100% recyclable and it doesn't lose its purity or its quality, then why isn't more glass being recycled? And there's a couple of reasons why. I visited this blog from Blog Tablas Creek, and they explored some of the issues. One major issue is the transportation. You see, unlike plastic, and which actually isn't recycled, but that's for another video, and like paper products and cardboard, glass is heavier, which makes transportation more difficult, and it's also a lot more fragile. Like broken glass can pose a hazard, so this is an issue. So it's become problematic, and due to the transportation costs and the fact that it's fragile, has caused a lot of glass recycling plants to close, which is pretty discouraging. There's also a lot of misinformation regarding recycling services. Like, a lot of people will put glass in the recycling bin, not realizing that many places do not take it, and they have no place to put it. So I also did a little reading on how glass is recycled. I found the process to be very interesting, so I pulled up this website from C&N's Chemical and Engineering News. And it kind of goes into detail, offers the same reasons why more glass isn't being recycled. It's at a much lower rate than many European countries, for instance, even though it's 100% recyclable. But the process for recycling the glass, basically it gets broken down, sorted. Here you can see from this. Once it's collected, gets broken down into something called cullet, which is like very fine, almost sand-like particles, and then this can be melted down to make new bottles. So then the last thing that I wanted to explore was whether or not that sort of business could be lucrative. Because I would ultimately like to have my own recycling services where I'm taking in everything, and I would like to provide those services to my local community so that it's not being shipped out. Now, with several glass recycling facilities having closed, it doesn't feel like it's very lucrative, but based on what I read and how I looked into it, it's all a matter of whether or not you have a buyer ready to take the cullet, ready to turn it into new uses. So this website, Trash Cans Unlimited, kind of goes into a little bit of detail. The materials that glass is made of: limestone, sand, soda ash, and cullet. Cleaned glass, scrap glass that's ready for production. The various uses, like it's not just for bottles. It can be used for road base, drainage backfill, fiberglass, like what you find in insulation, construction materials. And then the profitability. So For the reasons I had already listed about it, the fragility, the transportation, the profitability depends largely on whether or not there is a buyer ready for it. So I'm hoping in the future I can line up some buyers, and maybe because, there's a lot of local brewers here in my hometown, there's a need for it. And I'm hoping maybe someday glass recycling will be more lucrative so that we have less going into the landfill and that it's not posing a hazard to wildlife. So this is just a little bit of what I've learned, and if anyone has more information, please share, because this is just what I've done, my independent research. I've also included some fun upcycling projects which I would like to try myself. Working with glass can be hazardous on account of it breaking, especially if you're trying to cut it or do various things. So safety is always highly recommended when working with glass and when doing projects that involve any kind of cutting. But there are plenty of things that can be done with it. So in the meantime, since I haven't been able to find a good recycling resource here in my hometown that takes the glass, I'm just going to focus on doing the upcycling projects. But if you know of anyone, if you've heard of anything, I would love to hear all of the details. So the question is, can glass recycling be lucrative or not? If you know of businesses that have made success doing it, then please tell me all about it. Well, that's all for now. We'll see what I can make out of the glass that I've been holding back. Join me for upcycling projects, and I'll see you again soon.
So I decided to do a little bit of research about the metal recycling industry, and I learned that metal is one of the most recyclable products because nearly all types can be recycled. So I looked up this website, Metals and Spares, and it talked about the types that are non-recyclable, and the metal that is non-recyclable is usually just items that have hazardous materials in them, like uranium, plutonium, lead, for instance. So you can recycle almost all types of metals: steel, aluminum, copper, brass, zinc, iron, tin, like you name it. But some metals are worth more than a little bit others. So I found this nice website, Metal Scrapping 101, a complete metal scrapper's guide, and it goes through the entire process, the entire metal recycling process. So you collect it, it needs to be separated. And I learned that there are two types of metals. There's ferrous and there is non-ferrous. So what's the difference? Let me go back here. Ferrous metals are magnetic and the non-ferrous are non-magnetic. And I thought that the ferrous would be worth more. It turns out the non-ferrous pieces are usually worth a little bit more, like aluminum, copper. I was told copper is one of the more valuable metals if you're going to be scrapping any. So let's go back to that website. Not that website, this website. So if you're going to recycle, first you need to collect all your metals. You need to separate them according to type because you're going to get the most money by doing so. And whenever it goes through the recycling process, it gets melted down, it gets purified, and then resolidified, and then sent out to manufacturers. So metal is actually very sustainable. The fact that it can be melted down and reused so many times makes it a very sustainable item. Sometimes I wonder why we can't just replace a lot of our plastic containers with metal ones, but I'm sure there are reasons, which I'll get into later. So can you make money bringing metal to a recycling facility or to a metal scrapping yard? Yes, you can, but you have to bring a very large amount of it. So I went through, I looked up, this again goes into ferrous and non-ferrous, so I looked up the prices. Copper is one of the most valuable ones. A lot of the others are not really worth the trouble, and aluminum is another one, the metal cans. So unless you have large amounts of aluminum or you're scrapping, say, copper, you're probably not going to make a ton of money doing it. So I decided to look at prices. This is kind of a price overview. Brass and copper, as you can see, are usually worth the most. I was surprised steel wasn't worth more. I always assumed like steel and lead would be worth more, but no, aluminum is actually worth more. I think because it's more viable and more commonly used. But if you visit a website like Scrap Monster, it'll basically go over all of the prices for you, the average, the high price, the low price, to give you kind of a basic idea. And it's important to know this information if you plan on scrapping to make sure that you're getting the best price possible. So after I did that, I decided to look up a few metal scrapping areas or metal scrapping facilities in my area. I found McCoy Iron and Metal. And they break it down and make it very easy. They also have materials that are accepted, and they've separated them into the non-ferrous, which I covered, and the ferrous. And very important, if you're going to be scrapping metal, you need to know what they are not taking. So both of these websites covered those items. So concrete aluminum forms, phone wire, street signs, sewer lids. I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's like if you brought it in, it would clearly be stolen property, like railroad property, sewer lids, guardrails, grocery carts. Like, I think the reason they don't accept these is to prevent people from stealing these items and just bringing them in for cash. I also looked up CMC. And CMC sponsors the Boys and Girls Club of Springfield, which I think is really great. They break down the pricing, payment guidelines, like up to $500 in cash payments. And I think you would need a very large amount of metal to make even that much money. So they don't accept hazardous materials, automobiles without a title, mercury, office machines, things that are questionable, dangerous, like flammable, which seems like it would be common knowledge, but these are some good guidelines to follow for a person who's doing this for the first time and doesn't quite know what they're doing. And then I decided to ask some of my friends who have done this. I'm like, hey, is it worth it? And most of them said, if you have large amounts of aluminum cans, it can be, but it's easier just to put it in the recycling bin. You're probably not going to make a lot of money doing it, for instance. But for me, I want to have my own upcycling business someday. It's my dream to have my own recycling, trash service, upcycling business. And if metal is one of the items that I'm collecting, it's good to know that I could bring it to a facility and make a little bit of money off of it, because you can't really do that with the paper, the plastic, the cardboard, and the glass items. The recycling process for those is not quite as sustainable as it is with metal.
For the last couple of years, I've been looking into the recycling system in the United States to see what's working well and what's flawed. It's my dream to someday have my own recycling service where I offer trash pickup and I separate it and I have compost and metal and all of the things. And I was trying to figure out why it's not being done more efficiently when so much of what we produce is recyclable. Well, I've reached the biggest hurdle, and that is plastic. I had no idea plastic was so difficult to recycle and that so little of it was recyclable to begin with. So I want to share with you what I've learned today. I'm Angela Brose, and let's dive into it and look at the plastic recycling system in the United States. So, like many people, I put my plastic bottles and plastic jugs in the recycling bin with full confidence that it's being recycled, but unfortunately, that's really not the case. We've been misled, and turns out only about 5% of plastic is actually recycled in the United States. And of the 7 different types of plastic, only the first 2 are even recyclable. So how did we get into this mess? Well, I decided to read up on the history of plastic, and initially it was like a miracle product. It actually had some eco-friendly benefits. People were using plastic instead of ivory. People were using plastic instead of tortoise shells. So it was marketed as this like eco-friendly product, and it didn't really take off until after World War II, and it became a problem, more of a problem, in the 60s and 70s, whenever it became apparent that not only is it super cheap to make, but it's also incredibly flexible, incredibly durable, and just a great alternative to glass and metal and other raw materials. So what started out as a really great idea has seriously become a problem because, unfortunately, most of those plastics, due to the nature of the polymers, cannot be recycled into new products. Only 2 can actually be recycled into new products. So, like many people, I was misled. They printed this symbol. You see these 7 numbers, and it looks just like the recycling symbol. Yeah, that was intentional. That was to make people think that, oh, this is totally recyclable. But in reality, only the first 2 types of plastic, like water bottles, food containers, milk jugs, are actually recyclable. And it's very costly and takes a lot of time to do it, so it's just not that lucrative. So I did some reading from this website, greenmatters.com. Only about 5% of plastic is actually recycled. And this is a major problem. The other 95% either ends up in a landfill, or it ends up incinerated, or, as we've noticed, it ends up getting just tossed around all over the planet. It's clogging up water streams. It's ended up at the bottom of the ocean. You can find plastic even in the Amazon rainforest. So no solution yet has been found to cope with this disaster, this major plastic waste disaster. So I started trying to look into what we can do until we can find a better solution for it. And the best thing we can do as consumers is to try to wean ourselves off of single-use plastics for now. We have to turn the tap off before we can fix the leak, essentially. I've been following this great website by Catherine Kellogg, the Going Zero Waste, and she has all sorts of solutions and different ideas for using reusable items instead of a lot of the plastic waste ones. She even has a zero waste challenge that I was following. But that's not to say that there aren't various businesses trying to do something about it. Like Precious Plastic, they have molds. You can get the community involved, and you can actually make a variety of products with these molds. You can buy the machines, and that looks like a lot of fun. And then there's other ones like Beyond Plastics. They're also working to fight plastic pollution, to enforce plastic bag bans, and different ways that we can get legislation involved to solve this crisis. But ultimately, we're going to have to get corporations involved. They are responsible. They need to be the ones shifting the narrative and not putting all of the burden on the individual, because the individual is not responsible for this problem. But there are a few things you can do right now until we come up with a better solution. Don't use plastic water bottles, use a reusable one. No straws, disposable plastic items. Most things can be reusable. Bring your own grocery tote, for instance. And I'm going to continue to try to research a way that we can recycle these plastics, because it's a challenge. Aside from the costs of trying to process and clean it all and make it usable again, you also can't mix them all together because some will melt and burn at a temperature faster than others. So it's absolutely a crisis. So I'm going to spend the next year or so trying to figure out a way to make all of this plastic waste usable again. And it's hard to be optimistic when so many other people are working on the same problem and haven't found a solution yet, but we can't give up. So, wish me luck and drop any ideas that you have in the comments section, and hopefully one day I'll have an upcycling business and help reduce some of this plastic waste. I hope to see you there. Thanks.